Is Mark Carney extinguishing Justin Trudeau's policy and political legacy? I'm grateful to be joined by Amanda Galbraith, the principal and co-founder at the Oyster Group, and David Coletto, the founder and chair of Abacus Data, to answer that question and more in today's episode of Hub Politics. David and Amanda, always great to connect with you.
Hey, both.
Hello.
The reason this question is on my mind is for two reasons. The first is yesterday, of course, we had a piece of legislation announced by the Justice Minister that, amongst other things, proposed a series of mandatory minimum penalties that seems in tension with the Trudeau government's justice agenda. The second, now I'm going to name drop, I was in Ottawa yesterday for the Hub's wonderful immigration policy debate between Andrew Coyne and Jason Kenney. And after the debate, we were at the Met, well-known political establishment in and around the parliamentary precinct, and in walked former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. And it got me thinking, over the past several months, the Carney government has enacted a series of policies from reversing the carbon tax to reducing the growth of immigration levels to the MOU with Alberta that expresses its support, at least in principle, to a pipeline, to now this justice legislation. And it got me thinking, what aspects of the Trudeau legacy remain in place, and how should we think about what's happened over the past several months, in which we have a government comprised of many of the same people that were part of the Trudeau government working almost systematically to undo a lot of the key planks of the previous government's agenda. How are the two of you thinking about this as we bring an end to 2025? Amanda, go first.
I was hoping you would go, David, first. I also have to say, just before I get into the substance of this, that wow, is Prime Minister Trudeau a very different animal than Stephen Harper, because I don't think you could pay that man to darken the door of the Met, and
Yes.
yet, Prime Minister Trudeau hasn't been out of office for even a year, and he's already back at the watering hole. So that is, to me, is just very interesting from like a social, like social science aspect analysis
Yes.
there. Um, I'm actually kind of struggling to think of where like really key metrics or of the Trudeau legacy kind of remain intact, other than, as you point out, the entire cabinet, which is largely the same people that were implementing the agenda that they are now dismantling. I mean, if you look at like the big pieces of the climate agenda, most of those have been undone except for the industrial carbon tax.
Yes.
If we look at a lot of the immigration policies that he presided over, those have been totally reversed with, screeching tires and brake dust as the country grapples with the implications of what I think is breaking of our immigration system. If we look at even maybe the only, and this is not meant to be a shot, but it's going to sound like one, is it's still a very big spending government. And they still believe government has a role in guiding and shaping our economy, I think, to a much greater degree than the conservatives would be. It's just with different levers, right? But if you even look at like a feminist forward foreign policy, I mean, the prime minister kind of said, and there's also rumors of him, I think, probably slowly going to be cutting that department back, not as aggressively as I would like, but still there. So I truly struggle, other than to say they just played musical chairs with the key members of his cabinet. I struggle to think of like a signature initiative. You could maybe say Indigenous reconciliation, but even then, this government is really struggling to find their feet with the Indigenous community. But they haven't undone it per se, but they certainly are not consulting with them in a way that the previous government really seemed to like lean into.
Yeah, I put the question to you, David and Amanda, in part because if I think back to the first several months of the Trudeau government in 2015, of course, they reversed some key measures from its predecessor, including income splitting, some of the various tax credits, ultimately the increase of the OAS eligibility age. But that was in keeping with our normal understanding of a government changing from one party to the other. Mm-hmm. This is, as Amanda says, not only the same party, but a government comprised by and large of the same people. How, from your vantage point, should we be thinking about this significant, in effect, set of sweeping changes to the Trudeau-era policy legacy?
Well, look, I look at it from what the demand from the public is. And
Yes.
if you believe that, politics is like a market, then governments on any stripe should respond at least somewhat to that. And I think the reason the previous Trudeau government became so unpopular by the last year and a half, 2 years in office is because for most people, many of whom voted Liberal, it felt that the government just simply wasn't aligned with the priorities that it had. And so I think the easy answer, Sean and Amanda, is, in my view, the world changed fundamentally. And so the version of Liberal politics of 2015 of hope and change and gender equity, Indigenous reconciliation, and an aggressive climate agenda did fit the mood at the time, did fit the demand of many Canadians who voted Liberal or NDP after 10 years of Stephen Harper. But what happened was you had a pandemic, and then you had a series of events almost all tied to a rapid rise in inflation and a rise of what we describe as a scarcity mindset that basically meant those issues completely bottomed out in terms of being priorities for most people. Not everybody, they're still important to many people, but as priorities to the vast electorate, not anywhere near what dealing with the cost of living or protecting my access to healthcare or dealing with the price of a house came to be. And so when Mark Carney was elected, I think he understood that. I frankly did. And I think you can imagine how malleable politics really is and how the public even reacts to it. Like, I know it's frustrating to conservatives, but I have this chart that literally shows the week that Mark Carney is sworn in as Prime Minister in March of 2025, half the country's view of the government of Canada changes entirely.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And so I do think that yes, this is a wholesale change. It's frustrating, certainly to the leader of the opposition and the opposition members of parliament, but it is exactly what Mark Carney should have done. I think I've said this on this podcast 3 times, but every time you look at the data, the more people think Mark Carney is different than Justin Trudeau, the more they like him. That is fundamental to the success of this government and politically. Like, maybe Mark Carney believes in all of the policy he's doing, but it also happens to be really politically helpful, I think, at the moment.
Amanda, remember the Seinfeld episode when George Costanza is about to give up on dating and he decides to do the opposite of his instincts in every way? Is this the Costanza form of politics? And what does it say about the 3 of us and others who join us on Hub podcasts or write for the Hub have this instinct to want to intellectualize these things and create these frameworks or theories to help us situate the various changes, but as a political advisor, as someone who's been at the center of political power, how do you think about the way the public is perceiving the Carney government and the changes it's enacted to the Trudeau government's agenda?
I think David puts it correctly, right? You are offering a service to Canadians, and the service you're offering has to be something that they want to buy, and therefore you then get votes or you get support. And I think Prime Minister Carney rightly identified, as we all did, that like the Trudeau era was done and dusted. People were over it and sick of it. And instead, he has been able to, I call it, like, he runs a progressive conservative government. Like, I'm like, this is our first progressive conservative government since the 80s in this country. Like, he is running one, and by all intents and purposes. And I think if you had a conservative leader in that position, the Conservative Party would probably be quite happy with a lot of these policies, not all of them, but many of them. And I think you'd have the kind of like a middle ground base sort of like ticking along with being in government. So I think his job as a leader of a political party is to get elected and to keep people elected, and he's done that and then some. So I think he's got a lot of space to do it. He seems able to kind of meet the mood or kind of see, or his advisors perhaps are like really meeting the mood of the country. And I think he's a vessel that we've chosen, or voters have chosen to bring us forward through this time of scarcity and strife. People, see him and they feel, I truly think people see him and they feel relaxed. It's like, okay, he's got it under control. I may not know what a hinge moment means, but I feel like he's got it and I can worry about something else. Like, I feel like he's that kind of politician, and people want to not worry about what's going on in Ottawa for a second and worry about other things. And I think that's how he appeals to it. I don't think that trust transfer is quite was there with Polyev, which is where he sort of ran up against some walls. But I also think that wasn't there for Stephen Harper in 2006, and he got elected and he grew into that job. Whether Polyev has the opportunity the same that Carney has remains to be seen. But I think they've read the room on the pipeline issue because he's obviously taken a huge political gamble on it,
Yes.
and he continues to sort of take those big leaps. And he's got a really strong opposition to his right that is pushing him in that direction. So, as much as I've criticized them at times, here they sit, I think, pretty high in a good spot and channeling what Canadians are looking for.
Amanda used the language of services. David, you talked about the political marketplace, the dynamics of supply and demand. It made me think of a Globe and Mail op-ed that Ken Bosenkool, who you both know, wrote a year or two ago, in which he characterized the politics of Ontario Premier Doug Ford as one focused on customer service. He writes, quote, Mr. Ford wears his conservative disposition on his sleeve. It comes across as, quote, good customer service, which emerges from his experience selling labels in his family business. Now, you won't find the phrase good customer service in the classic conservative text, but it fundamentally reflects anyway, I won't go on and on. But is that the nature of politics in 2025? Is it really about one's responsiveness to the dynamics of supply and demand? And how do we measure supply and demand? I guess this means, David, that you and your team at Abacus Data are going to continue to be in high demand, helping politicians understand the public mood. But in all seriousness, how much is there room for politicians to be responsive to the public, and how much is there room for politicians to, in effect, lead the public and shape how the public is thinking about their own political demands?
Yeah, and I think as someone who measures public opinion, I still believe you can shape it, and it is shaped on a lot of dimensions by leaders, whether it's political leaders or pop culture, or the conversations that happen because of business leaders or community leaders. So a lot of what we say is public opinion is just simply a reflection or a construction. So I do think leadership can still matter a lot, but it has to be leadership in the context of the moment. And I think Doug Ford, if you look at a poll that we put out that says the top three issues are the cost of living, the economy, and housing or healthcare, right? And you run on a platform of I'm going to protect Ontario, it is so perfectly aligned, I think, with the mindset of a sizable portion of that province, in fact, of the country, right? And so it's like, it's what's your narrative, as this is more of Amanda's world, what's your narrative, and does that align with what I'm feeling? And then the specifics almost don't matter, I frankly think, right? Like it's a perfect example, the federal budget was a perfect example of how a complicated, nuanced document meant nothing to almost anybody. They didn't understand what was in it. But if you trusted Mark Carney, if you thought that he was the best person at this moment to lead the country through this incredibly difficult and complex series of things that need to happen because of Trump, because of all the other things, then you just trusted that it was the right blueprint to get there. In the same way that people, I think now in Ontario and in some cases in Alberta, and a lot of incumbents actually are doing quite well because they've built that sense of I've got your back, and I'm going to stay focused on the things that matter to you, right? So I don't necessarily agree, and I know this went to your argument, Sean, but I don't necessarily agree with the notion that you just simply put your finger up in the air, and if a wind's moving this way, you need to go this way, and if the wind moves that way, you go that way. I think there is risk for Doug Ford in only doing that and being seen as just simply flipping and flopping without any framework to sort of structure the policy. I think Mark Carney's much more of having a strategy. He can't articulate it often very clearly, but I think people believe he does. And that is very helpful in a moment of when people feel as precarious as they do it right now.
Amanda, what do you think?
I think we're certainly in a place where politicians are addicted to polling, and to David's benefit, and I certainly like seeing it too. And I think, I think that they like to be I've literally never met a politician that doesn't like polling, doesn't want to see all the polling in the world, and polling on whether or not they'll get reelected, even if they just got elected like a month ago. Um, but I think that, and I think that can lead the political class sometimes to be way too responsive to sort of the moment of the day, as opposed to thinking big like we had in the Mulroney era or even the Chrétien era, where we're proposing constitutional reform and all
Yes.
kinds of, like GST, like big ideas, right? And I think that
Yes.
actually, like Sean, to go back to your previous question around the work like the hub organizations like the hub does, I think what you do is kind of buttress that conversation up, right, around like where do we need to go as a country, what kind of reforms do we need to be happening, conversations that used to happen in the political sphere that I think increasingly aren't anymore, and just the memification and 30-second news clips and that kind of stuff. So that I think there's an important role to be played here, and I mean I do a lesser brand of it because I do the comms part of it, but nonetheless, so I think there's a risk there, but I also think it's important that politicians have longevity if the populace feels like they're on their side, or they're referencing them. And I think Ken was really smart. And one thing I don't know if he mentions in his article is it's not just like a label company. Like Premier Ford learned it because he was a city councilor, right?
Mm.
And I work in municipal politics, and I can tell you that that is to me the best training ground of anywhere in the world. I knew within for politics, I knew within 2 hours if we screwed up on a policy announcement, because it was immediate. People
Yes.
get to you immediately at that level of government in a way that they don't in others. So I think I think responsiveness is important. I feel like maybe the crack cocaine of polling has gotten politicians to the point where they lack courage in certain places and times. Um, but perhaps we can get to like a medium ground where they are taking big swings. And I would say, like being when your Quebec lieutenant quits and your environment minister resigns and does a media tour about why your government is betraying all your climate goals, and you're the ex, climate ambassador to the UN, like that's a pretty big swing
Yes.
for like, to give him whether or not this is a performative act that'll never lead to a pipeline. I think he's taking the political damage as if he was about to build one. So to me, I think that's like a big action for the prime minister to take, and I it's bold, and I think it's a good thing.
Yeah, a good example, as you say, Amanda, of trying to lead and shape public opinion as opposed to being merely responsive to it. So far, we've been talking about this extraordinary sea change in the direction of federal policy under Prime Minister Carney over the Trudeau government, of course, that comprise many of the same people involved in and around Prime Minister Carney. And I want to go there next because as the adage is, as the adage says, personnel is policy. There are ongoing rumors and speculation about potential by-elections early in the new year that may be about Prime Minister Carney bringing new and different people in to his cabinet. Most recently, in the past 24 hours or so, we have an announcement that Canada's longstanding ambassador to Washington will step down sometime in 2026 and may be replaced by Mark Wiseman, someone who's worked in senior financial roles in different parts on Bay Street, is the chair of the Century Initiative, and someone has proximity to Prime Minister Carney. Why don't I stay with you, Amanda? Talk a bit about personnel and how important it'll be for the Carney government in 2026.
Yeah, this is huge. I actually think this is a really big underplayed political story. Kirsten Hillman's been in that role as the Canadian ambassador underneath the Trudeau government. Before she was ambassador, she was actually like a senior diplomat,
And
and
someone
she
who
still
worked
handled
closely with the previous Harper government,
yeah,
had broad, multipartisan admiration and respect.
yeah. She like beloved across the aisle. If you look at
Yes.
the reception now that she's announced that she's leaving her post, Rona Ambrose is posting, like
Yes.
Justin Trudeau has posted nice things. By all intents and purposes, in a government that you can't really find any senior females in the Carney administration and the PMO. She's one who has stayed there, and by my understanding earned the respect of all folks around. And to have, I think, her leave is a big deal. And now she has been in that role for a long enough time. I feel like I would also want a vacation if I were her. So
Yes,
like,
indeed.
fair enough. I'll take it at face value that she said she wanted to leave at the beginning of the new administration. He asked her to stay on, which is what any ambassador should be doing, by the way, is saying, hey, I've offered my resignation. And they say, no, no, please stay, or thank you very much, I have someone to appoint this. But the rumors now are that it would be Mark Wiseman, who is the former chair of BlackRock, who's very, as you mentioned, very close to Prime Minister Carney, and I think would again signal a very serious business focused. His Rolodex in the US will be massive, and a very different ilk than what Ms. Ambassador Hillman had. So to me, I think it's a huge story around what the negotiations are going to look like in the next year. It's smart of the prime minister to put like one of his people in, so much as the previous ambassador was someone competent when it's one of your closest allies. It just, I think, shows you the importance of what this job is. It's also a very plum position, right? In the past, appointees have been like Derek Burney for Harper was an ambassador. He was chair of the transition committee, it usually goes to like a senior individual, but also somebody who is highly skilled or regarded. And I think, Mark Wiseman certainly would fit that bill.
Just in parentheses, Derek, it must be said, is from Thunder Bay, and someone who wrote for us this week. Both good things. David, take up this point about personnel. You can take it in any direction you want, but maybe as you think about your interjection, it's worth making the point that there is a lot of rumor that there are some tensions within the Carney Caucus, in part because some of the Trudeau-era MPs and ministers have had misgivings about how far the government has moved on some of the policy files that we've been talking about. How important in your mind is it for the Prime Minister to inject some more people, more Carney Liberals, if I can put it that way, in the cabinet and the caucus?
Well, again, I don't know if from a public opinion perspective that it's essential, because as I mentioned earlier, you didn't need to change literally anybody other than the Prime Minister, and you saw that rapid swing in public opinion. So, folks in Ottawa, where I live, like to think that everyone who walks down Spark Street is famous and everybody outside of the city knows who we are. But, you'd be lucky if most Canadians could name more than one, if one, cabinet minister, in the Carney government today. And I think that will be true forever, frankly, because of the way our media environment is and the way and the amount of attention that the Prime Minister themselves gets when anything is reported on about the government. So I'm not sure it will matter all that much to the public image of the government. Yes. I think it's a problem potentially if you have, cabinet ministers or former cabinet ministers, to Amanda's point, going on tour explaining why they think a signature piece of this new government's, or I don't know if I'm going to call it new anymore. I guess it's not quite new. This government's
their messaging's working.
They're calling for the spin.
Lines have seared into my brain. Is really bad policy. So, but I do think it matters perhaps more to just the machinery of government. To your point, policy is personnel's policy. That he's looking for people who are going to bring a different set of priorities, experiences, values. And so one of the biggest challenges, I think, for the government will remain keeping that caucus together, because you do have now stitching together what was already, I think, under the Trudeau years, because Trudeau was so essential to the success of the Liberals, you had still a fairly diverse view of, you had more like right-wing Liberals and far left, very progressive ones on different issues. That's still going to be the case, right? You have a member of parliament from Victoria. At the same time, you have members of parliament from Northern Ontario and Alberta and Quebec all sharing the same caucus. So he's got to be, I think, it's more of like, will there still be people in that cabinet, in prominent positions, that those Trudeau-era members of parliament will feel are going to voice their views around the cabinet table or not? I think, is going to be increasingly important.
I'm sensitive we don't have a lot of time left. So, Amanda, I'll come to you, and then David for some final observations. You can pick up what we've been discussing or anything else you want to tie up the conversation with.
I think one of the weak points of the federal government is the fact that the prime minister is, an army of one, all roads lead through him. So I think, it publicly doesn't hurt him, but I think behind the scenes getting stuff done, it does. So, we've all heard the rumors of there'll be a bunch of resignations and appointments in the new year, perhaps time to run some by-elections, and maybe he can get some actual folks in there that would, I think, better represent the kind of government he wants to run. Because typically when you have like a new government elected, right, you get a whole new
Yes.
branch of MPs that you can pick from. Instead, he's got like this tired old horse that they've been riding around for a decade that he's now got to like make shiny and new and slap new branding on it. And so far it's worked well for him. But the machinery there, like the actual muscle, is has been working this government for a decade. And I think that will increasingly be a problem for him the longer he goes, or he risks more Guilbeault, right? I mean, the man wrote an op-ed in the Toronto Star on top of doing like tout le monde en parle. Like he literally has not shied away from a single mic. I think if I went up to him and said, I would like you to come on my like this podcast, he'd be like, sure. Like, let's talk about
Stephen
it, right?
Guilbeault,
Like,
if you're listening,
that is
we'd
the
love to
problem.
have you join us. Yes.
Yeah.
David?
Look, I think the other fact, though, is that Mark Carney saved most of these MPs'
Yes,
jobs.
well said.
Right? And if you recall a year ago, we were doing this. If our podcast existed a year ago, we would be talking about the imminent demise of not just those MPs, but maybe the Liberal Party entirely. And in literally a few weeks, all of them got a second life, maybe a third life, because I think even the pandemic maybe saved them in some instances as well. So I think, don't underestimate still the kind of authority that Mark Carney can now play, simply because he doesn't have a relationship with most of these members of parliament. He didn't, at least when he became leader of the party. But it's this authority with the public. And that's why, they care about the polls. It's because it is a source of credibility in keeping that kind of disparate caucus together.
Yeah.
So I think that is his strength. And the moment you lose that, you saw with Trudeau, you start to see that authority fray. I think Guilbeault is not going to last much longer. I don't know how you can put up with somebody who does this on a consistent basis. And he's going to have, maybe the deal was you get to go and say your piece, and then I'll send you off to, be our representative in the federated state of Micronesia in the middle of the South Pacific or something.
Yeah, I'd be shipping him off somewhere far. I don't think he'd get the fancy plum post he was supposed to get at this point if it was my government, but what do I know?
A ton of insight from the two of you. What a year it's been. I started with my comments about seeing the former Prime Minister at the Met last night. We began the year, you recall, with him as the Prime Minister. He only announced his resignation as of January 6th. What a 12 months it's been. We've been grateful to have you each and every week to understand a lot of these fast-moving currents. Our final episode of 2025 will be next week. We're going to do something a bit different. Check out your Hub newsletter and social media accounts for opportunities to submit questions to get insights from David and Amanda. Thanks to both of you for this conversation, and I look forward to catching up one more time in 2025 next week.